Now, previously in our story, part 1, after Pastor Chikwedi's guilt of attempting to sacrifice Ada, his beloved daughter, this guilt became a burden and a nightmare to him. He decided to distance himself from his family and mostly from Ada, his daughter, and he resorted to prayers and fasting while staying in church day and night. His wife Nneka became worried about him, and she decided to go and try to speak to him in comfort at church, because as a family, her and Ada were missing him as the man in the house. And so let's continue from here for our next part of the story. Thank you so much. One evening, after many days had passed, Ada knocked softly on the church door. Pastor Chikwedi, weak from fasting, opened the door a crack and saw his daughter standing there, holding a bouquet of wild flowers. "Daddy, these are for you," she said, smiling shyly. Pastor Chikwedi stared at her, tears filling his eyes. How could she still love him after everything he had done? He knelt down and pulled her into his arms, sobbing. "I'm so sorry, Ada," he cried. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." Ada wrapped her small arms around his neck and whispered, "I love you, Daddy. God forgives you, so I forgive you too." Her words broke through the wall of guilt Pastor Chikwedi had built around himself. In that moment, he realized that true forgiveness wasn't something he could earn. It was something given freely, just like Ada's love. After that night, Pastor Chikwedi returned home, but things were not the same. Nneka was still distant, and the villagers treated him with suspicion. He knew it would take a long time to rebuild the trust he had lost, but he was determined to try. He started by confessing to his church congregation on Sunday morning. The church was full and everyone listened in silence as the pastor stood before them, his voice trembling. "I have sinned," he said. "I allowed greed and pride to lead me down a dark path. I nearly sacrificed my own child for power. I cannot undo what I did, but I ask for your forgiveness. I will spend the rest of my life serving the village humbly and faithfully." The congregation was quiet. Some were moved by his honesty, while others couldn't look in his eye. But no one left the church that day. They stayed and listened to him, and that was a small step towards healing. While Pastor Chikwedi began his journey of redemption, Nneka struggled with her own feelings. She loved her husband, but the memory of that night haunted her. How could she ever truly trust him again? She saw him trying, praying and fasting, helping the villagers, but the pain in her heart was still raw. One evening, as they sat together in silence, Nneka spoke quietly. "Chikwedi, I don't know if I can ever forget what happened. You almost took our daughter from us." Pastor Chikwedi looked at her with sadness in his eyes. "I know, Nneka. I don't expect you to forgive me easily. I was blinded by greed and I almost lost everything that matters. But I promise I will never let anything like that happen again." Months passed, and just as Pastor Chikwedi thought the dark days were behind him, the mysterious man with the glowing red eyes returned. One night, while Chikwedi was alone in the church, the man appeared at the door. His presence filled the room with coldness. "You thought you could escape your promise, Pastor Chikwedi?" The man sneered. "You made a deal. I will not let you go easily." Pastor Chikwedi's heart raced, but this time he was not the same weak man who had been consumed by greed. He stood tall and faced the man. "I made a mistake," Pastor Chikwedi said firmly, "but I have repented. You have no power over me anymore." The man laughed, his red eyes glowing brighter. "You think you can fight me? You are still mine, Pastor Chikwedi." But Pastor Chikwedi had learned that true power came from love and faith, not from dark promises. he knelt down and prayed, calling on God to protect him and his family. As he prayed, a brilliant light filled the church, just like it had on the night Neka had stood against the dark man. The mysterious figure hissed, retreating into the shadows. "This is not over," the man growled, before disappearing into the night once more. Pastor Chikwedi knew that the dark man would not give up easily. But now he had something stronger than fear. He had faith. He knew that with God's help, he could face any challenge, even one as powerful as the stranger with the red eyes. He shared his experience with the church, warning them of the danger of greed and temptation. The congregation listened intently, some moved with tears by his honesty and courage. As days passed, Pastor Chikwedi found strength in his family and his faith. He had lost his way once, but now he was determined never to let darkness rule in his heart again. But deep in the shadows, the mysterious man was still watching, waiting for his chance to strike again. As Pastor Chikwedi rebuilt his life, strange things began happening in the village. Crops started failing, animals grew sick, and people began to whisper about a curse. Some villagers believed that Pastor Chikwedi's dealings with the dark man had brought misfortune upon them. Tensions grew, and some people began turning against Pastor Chikwedi, blaming him for the village's troubles. Even some members of his church started doubting him. Neka stood by his side, though the weight of their troubles was heavy on her heart. "Chikwedi, what if they are right?" she whispered one night. "What if the dark man's curse is still with us?" Pastor Chikwedi didn't have any answer. He could feel the darkness creeping back into their lives, but he didn't know how to fight it. The village elders, who had once been supportive of Pastor Chikwedi, called for another meeting. This time they were less patient and more fearful. "We cannot ignore the signs," one elder said. "Since the night of your dealings with the dark man, nothing has been right in this village. The crops are drying, the livestock are sick, and our people are suffering. What will you do to fix this, Pastor Chikwedi?" Pastor Chikwedi stood before them, his heart heavy with guilt and fear. "I will pray. I will continue seeking God's guidance, but I believe this is a test of our faith, a trial we must endure." The elders were not satisfied. "Faith alone may not be enough. We need action, Pastor Chikwedi. If you don't find a way to lift this curse, we may have to take matters into our own hands." The threat was clear. The village was losing hope, and Pastor Chikwedi knew that if he doesn't do something, everything he had worked for could be lost forever. The pressure weighed heavily on Pastor Chikwedi. The village was falling apart, and the elders' warning echoed in his mind. Desperate to save his family and the village, Pastor Chikwedi knew he had to act quickly. He prayed day and night, seeking a solution, but the answers didn't come as easily as before. His faith, though strong, felt like it was being tested in ways he had never imagined. Neka, seeing her husband distressed, tried to comfort him. "Chikwedi, we've been through so much. God will guide us again." But Pastor Chikwedi shook his head, frustration building. "I fear this darkness is more powerful than we realized, Neka. If I can't defeat it, the village will turn against us." Neka understood his fear, but she refused to let despair take over. "You are not alone in this. We will face whatever comes together." Pastor Chikwedi knew she was right. He couldn't face the darkness alone. But where could he turn? The villagers didn't trust him, the elders were growing impatient, and the dark man seemed to be watching his every move. One night, as Pastor Chikwedi knelt in prayer, the air in the room turned cold. He didn't need to open his eyes to know who had come. The dark man with the glowing red eyes stood before him once again, his presence thick with evil. "You cannot escape me, Pastor Chikwedi. the man said, his voice smooth like poison. "You thought you could turn away from the deal, but the price must still be paid." Pastor Chikwedi clenched his fists, resisting the temptation. The man's words filled his heart with doubt. But he didn't give in. "I will never sacrifice my family for your promises." The man's eyes glowed brighter. "You have until the next moon to decide. If you refuse me again, the village will fall into darkness forever." With that, the man vanished, leaving Pastor Chikwedi trembling. Neka, who had been watching silently from the doorway, rushed to her husband's side. "He's trying to break you, Chikwedi. Don't listen to him." Pastor Chikwedi shook his head in frustration. "But what if he's right? What if my refusal is causing all these sufferings? The crops, the sickness, it is all happening because of me." Neka grabbed his hands, her eyes fierce. "No, this is not your fault. He's the one bringing darkness, not you. Don't let him trick you into believing his lies." Pastor Chikwedi sighed, his heart heavy with uncertainty. He had chosen the path of righteousness, but the village was falling apart and time was rushing out. "I need to find a way to stop him," Pastor Chikwedi said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to break his hold over us." The next day, Pastor Chikwedi went to see one of the oldest men in the village, Papa Okeke. He was known for his wisdom and knowledge of ancient traditions. If anyone knew how to defeat the dark man, it would be him. "Papa Okeke," Pastor Chikwedi began, "I have come for your help. I am being haunted by a dark man who has cursed this village. I need to know how to fight him." The older man nodded slowly, his face grave. "I know of the darkness. It is not new in our land. Many years ago, our ancestors faced a similar evil. It thrives on greed and fear." Pastor Chikwedi came closer to him. "How did they defeat it?" Papa Okeke took a deep breath. "They did not defeat it. They banished it through sacrifice, but not the kind you were offered. It requires a sacrifice of self-humility, forgiveness, and unwavering faith. The only way to truly banish of this evil is to gather the village and cleanse the land with a ritual of unity. Only then will the darkness have no place to live." Pastor Chikwedi left Papa Okeke's home with renewed hope. He knew what needed to be done, but convincing the village to come together after everything that had happened wouldn't be easy. Many still blamed him for the curse. Would they even listen to him? Neka encouraged him. "You have to try, Chikwedi. This is our only hope. The village needs to hear the truth." The following Sunday, Pastor Chikwedi stood before his congregation, nervous but determined. The church was packed with villagers, many of them waiting to hear what he had to say about the growing troubles. "I know many of you have lost faith in me," Pastor Chikwedi began, "but I stand before you today to tell you that I have found a way to end the darkness that has plagued our village. It is not through power or sacrifice or others, but through unity and faith." The villagers listened in silence as Pastor Chikwedi explained the ritual, how they would need to come together as one, letting go of their fear and anger, and offering forgiveness for the mistakes of the past. Some nodded in agreement, but others looked doubtful. One man stood up. "Why should we trust you, Pastor? You brought this curse upon us." Pastor Chikwedi took a deep breath. "I made mistakes. I allowed greed and pride to guide me. But this darkness preys on those feelings. If we continue to fight among ourselves, it will only grow stronger. The only way to defeat it is by coming together." Despite Pastor Chikwedi's heartfelt plea, not everyone was convinced. The village was divided. Some wanted to believe in the power of faith, while others were still angry and afraid. The elders called for another meeting, and tension ran high. "We cannot afford to wait any longer," one elder said. "The crops are failing, the children are falling ill. We need action, not prayers." Another elder, more hopeful, spoke up. "But what if the ritual works? We must try everything we can to save the village. The argument went back and forth, and Pastor Chikwedi felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. The dark man's words echoed in his mind. Would the village turn on him if the things got worse? In the end, the elders decided to give the ritual a chance. We will perform the ritual of unity, they announced, but if it fails, we will no longer follow Pastor Chikwedi. The stakes had never been higher. On the night of the full moon, the entire village gathered in the clearing near the river. The air was thick with tense and fear. Pastor Chikwedi, Neka, and Ada stood at the center of the gathering, while Papa Okeke led the ritual. The villagers joined hands, forming a circle. They sang ancient songs of hope and unity, their voices rising into the night sky. Pastor Chikwedi closed his eyes, praising and praying with all his heart that this would work. Suddenly the air grew cold, and the dark man appeared at the edge of the circle. His red eyes gleamed with anger. "You can't stop me," he roared. "This village is mine." But the villagers, now united, continued singing, their voices growing louder and stronger. The dark man stepped forward, but something stopped him. The circle of unity shone with the bright light, the same light that had protected Neka and Ada all those months ago. The dark man hissed in fury, retreating into the shadows. The light from the circle grew brighter and brighter, pushing the darkness back until it was gone. When the light finally faded, the villagers stood in stunned silence. The darkness that had plagued the village for so long was gone. The crops would grow again, the livestock would heal, and the peace would return. Pastor Chikwedi fell on his knees, tears streaming down his face. He had been saved not by power or sacrifice, but by faith, love, and unity. The village celebrated that night, not just for their victory over the darkness, but for the lessons they had learnt. Pastor Chikwedi had redeemed himself, not only in the eyes of the villagers, but in his own heart. From that day forward, the village of Obinzi was known not for the darkness that had once consumed it, but for the strength of its people and the power of faith. And Pastor Chikwedi, though humbled by his past, continued to lead the village with the wisdom he had gained from his journey. For he had learnt that true power comes not from sacrifice, but from love, forgiveness, and the strength that comes from standing together. Thanks for watching my video, and Pastor Chikwedi's story reminds me about the saying which says that a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. Don't rush the process, always allow yourself to grow at your own pace. Stop comparing your life to other people's achievements. Once again, I appreciate for your support, and if this is your first time learning on this channel, I kindly request for your subscription, like, and comment. Share my videos. I love you all. Let's meet in our next story.